Like I said, my name is Eddie Sundquist. I'm actually an attorney and former teacher from Jamestown. I also have an office in Olean, so if any of you are near the area, feel free to stop in. I work with Lewis and Lewis right on North Union in Olean. So come in, stop in, say hello. I actually, like I said, grew up in Jamestown, born and raised, and went off to school at St. John Fisher College in Rochester. I was the first in my family to go to college, so I understand the importance of education and being able to understand hard work. After college, I went off to become a teacher. I taught middle school science during the day in an alternative school in Philadelphia, and worked on my master's at the University of Pennsylvania at night. After a couple of years of that, I decided it was time to come home. I wanted to come back to the people that raised me, come back to the place that I grew up in. So I actually enrolled at the University of Buffalo Law School. Went to law school there, focused a lot on criminal justice reform and how do we change the way we look at suspension in our schools and how do we look at crime and punishment in our courts. I ultimately came back home. I went to join the law firm Lewis and Lewis, and I've been practicing for the past couple of years, representing both injured workers and grieving families across the Southern Tier, which has been an incredible experience. You know, I'll tell you what, we see way too many times people just getting up and leaving in this district. We've seen manufacturers up and leave their people here, and there's nothing that we are doing about it. You know, Mr. Reed today talked about the fact that he really wants job creation and that he really wants economic development. Well, you know what? Giving folks an extra $1,000 at the end of the year doesn't create the jobs, right? And there's no guarantee that those jobs are going to be made under this tax scam. I'm sorry, tax plan, excuse me. You know, it's very interesting to see. You know, you give some folks some money and maybe that works out. But the reality is that we have a lot of corporate entities that really aren't going to be creating jobs and have gone on record saying that. If any of you had watched the news or even seen any of the cable news networks, they have people interviewing where they say, you know, we're not going to be making jobs, but we're happy to take the tax cut, right? And that's a problem. That's an absolute problem. Because for me, I jumped into this race because I saw that nothing was happening in this district. That as you go along, you don't have young folks coming back, you don't have jobs coming back, and we're doing nothing with the people, these good union jobs that have just up and left. And I couldn't have that. I could not stand and wait for something to happen. So I jumped into this race. I said, we need to have a new look for the New York 23rd. We need to have a new idea here. And we need to make sure that we're not only bringing young folks back, but we're supporting the people that are here. That we are actually...
I've been a teacher my entire adult life. I've been a union member my entire adult life. My wife, who just retired as a teacher, I have 2 daughters, and we have a big red fuzzy dog, and we live in Painted Post. I agree with Nick how nice it is that the congressman will come out and put his positions out. The problem we have is that we disagree with all those positions. And I think we have to separate the two things. It's one thing to be willing to put them out. It's another thing to say that that's acceptable to us. And as a guy who deals with kids every day and have for the last 38 years, a lot of the tax cuts are going to affect the middle class people. They're going to affect the parents of these kids. They're going to affect these kids when they grow up. One thing that kind of gets brushed aside is the budget. That's going to cut a lot of programs for these kids. It's going to cut programs for free and reduced lunches. It's going to cut programs for before and after school. It's going to cut issues where they can go see a psychologist, a social worker, or a guidance counselor in their school district. Those are huge. Those are huge things that don't really come up. And when we rely on the top 1% to figure out what's best for the rest of us, I agree with Eddie. They're not going to do it the way it should be done. I've always been a firm believer in the good of the whole is the good of all, and the good of all is to have everybody sharing the burden. I'm on the New York State United Teachers Board of Directors. I represent this area right here. I met a couple of Salamanca teachers. I represent those guys. I travel this district 3 or 4 times a month and speak to the teacher groups and represent them. So I'm very familiar with what we're dealing with across the district, whether it be here in Salamanca, whether it be Jamestown, whether it be Ithaca, whether it be Corning, any of those places. So I I don't want to say it's a unique perspective, but I have a perspective where I am in the middle of it. I've been endorsed by the National Education Association. I've been endorsed by the American Federation of Teachers. I have the people that will put feet on the ground and help us pull this through. So I appreciate everybody out here. It wasn't a hard drive here. I'm guessing it's going to be a little different going back. But I appreciate you guys that are here, and I look forward to talking to you after we're done. Thank you.
And I live in Owego, New York with my wife Nancy and a big black dog named Leo.
They should meet.
They should meet, absolutely, a play date for sure. So the reason I'm running is because I took an oath when I was 17 years old at the Air Force Academy to support and defend the Constitution of the United States from all enemies, foreign and domestic. And I think special interest, and in some cases self-interest of Congress, is a domestic threat to the Constitution, and I feel obligated to run based on that. I have experience that I think would serve you well if I were your congressman. I have over 30 years of experience in the Air Force. As an Air Force Academy graduate, an officer, a pilot, a commander of an airlift wing of over 1,260 airmen and women, and over $93 million annual budget and 14 airplanes. I've flown and served everything from the Middle East in the first Gulf War to Afghanistan, and even in Antarctica in support of National Science Foundation. They named a glacier after me, I found out 3 years after I left that. So I've seen glaciers calving and the effect of real climate change all over the world, and it's real. I think I also have life experiences beyond the military. A litigator, defense attorney, owned my own practice, worked in Lockheed as a business development professional. And most pertinent, I worked in the U.S. Senate early in my career. I was a Brookings Fellow for Senator Carl Levin, and for a year on his personal staff, and I worked for the Secretary and the Chief of Staff of the Air Force and Air Force Senate Liaison. And I was able to successfully advocate for seriously injured airmen who happened to be in a C-130 large airplane, went off the end of the runway in Central America, went through a wall, burst into flames, slid out into the middle of a highway. 3 people died and 7 people survived. And the people who survived were denied health care from the Air Force because they're reservists, their status as reservists. They were relegated to base pay only, no health care for their families, no credit toward retirement for the entire time that they were in recovery for those serious injuries. I thought that was wrong. I worked on both sides of the aisle, both on the House and the Senate. I didn't go with bags of money to contribute to campaigns. I went with a passion to help people and ideas and facts that were compelling enough that both sides of the aisle said this needs to change, and it helped. And it made a difference for those individual airmen, their families, and all who followed. It was a highlight of my career. I am in this because I want to help real people with real problems. Okay, so let me kind of bring things together. If we want change in Congress, we need to start with the kind of people we send. If they're not driven and guided by core values of integrity first and service before self, we're going to get more of the same, and we can't afford more of the same. So this tax program, plan, reform, whatever you want to call it, is not fair. We're asking middle-class people to pay for the very highest, most wealthy, and corporations. Those people that offshored our jobs are going to get a huge benefit and a tax relief on things they should have paid taxes on. So this happened in 2004. 2004, the American Jobs Creation Act, there was over $330 billion that was offshore, and they didn't want to pay taxes on it, so what did they do? They did a one-time good deal, 5.25%, brought it back. 90% of the money was used to buy back stock, jack up the cost of stock, and guess what? It had no appreciable impact. So here's what's going to happen. There are 5 priorities of the Koch brothers. Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security. They want to undermine it. They want to get rid of anything that's anything that has to do with healthcare, and the tax code lower for everybody. And what it's going to happen is when the growth doesn't happen, Tom Reed's going to turn back into a deficit block and he's going to cut social programs. It's all part of the plan, and it's sick.
Started in my career as a Presbyterian minister, and I did that for 16 years, and I continue to do that. To this day, I still preach on Sundays. I bounce around from church to church, so I really enjoy that. I'm also a social worker. I work for Ontario Yates Hospice, so I really do get involved in the insurance end of things, so I understand health insurance and the impact that the ACA has had on millions of people. And I sign people up all the time. In fact, it was just last week, when I had somebody who was paying, through their company, they were paying, gosh, probably $300 to $400 a month for insurance for their family. I was able to perfectly, through the exchange, to help them with a nice $20 a month. $20 a month, I saved them like thousands of dollars. And so it's possible. The ACA has been really a lifesaver for so many. Just imagine those people that you know who may have had cancer, right? They had cancer. They lost their job. They lost their job due to health issues. And now they need insurance. Before, because they had a pre-existing condition, there was no chance of that. Today with the ACA, they're allowed to have the insurance that they need to live. Folks, a lot of good things are going to be undone with this administration. A lot of good things have been undone with this administration. From the idea that climate change doesn't exist, from the notion that if you tax the middle class, that somehow you're going to get growth and you're going to expand the tax base. Come on, we're not silly, we're not stupid. I believe firmly that we've got to work together across lines, not some artificial working together across lines, but coming together. As a community organizer, as a pastor, that's all I ever did was work with people to create programs that helped the poorest, the most vulnerable members of our society. I did it every day, and we became a legend for it in Naples. It was just a wonderful thing that we got together and did. So I think, as someone who has the energy, who has the enthusiasm to serve you as your congressperson, I am impassioned to look for equality in our society. I have the passion to help the most vulnerable, but also, most importantly, the middle class. We are getting completely taken for a ride, and we need to fill our pockets again. We need to get out there and spend, of course, and create jobs. That's where jobs come from. They don't come from the top down. They never have, and they never will. So please, as we get closer and closer to June 26th, please consider a good old Presbyterian minister and someone who just loves to work hard to get things done, and get things done by actually reaching across party lines and philosophical lines to do what's best for everybody, not just a tiny group of people called the richest and the mega richest in our country. Thank you very much.
The activism is wonderful, and it's what's going to, I think, really make a difference in our communities. That's really the hope, right? Interesting, Carl Warrington just brought up the Essential Plan. It's a $20 a month subsidized healthcare program, which is also on the chopping block at the moment. So it'll be a little bit tougher to place families in that regard. So myself, my name is Ian Golden. I'm a small business owner from Ithaca. I would be one that would benefit probably from the tax plan that's on the table. And I want to always be, I think, cognizant of, I think, providing where credit is due, like across the aisle. I think there are many people in our district that would potentially see a benefit from the tax plan. There are a lot that won't, but there are some that will. And I think that's a really important thing, right? I think both of us I shouldn't say both of us, but whether we are Democrats, whether Republicans, we're continually fed fairly inflammatory information, right? And we want to focus on the attributes that we see through just our lens, and we really want to hone in on that. When really there's a lot of truth, I think, in between, and I think that that's really important. Here in Cattaraugus County, 45% of households are having a tough time making ends meet. 26% of all children, roughly 5,000 children in just Cattaraugus County alone, are below the poverty line. The amount that families could get back, I mean, that's a big deal. And I want to make sure that we acknowledge that. But what we also need to acknowledge is there's a lot of falsities also being put out there around the tax plan. There are a lot of people that are going to hurt. To your earlier comment, that it's really a state issue, and right, and Representative Reed likes to deflect that back to the state because there's he knows a lot of angst regarding Albany at the moment, and people in New York, taxes are a big problem, right, and we need to do something about that. But I think 34% of the state budget comes from the federal level. And when you start making cutbacks in funding from the federal level, that absolutely goes down into the communities. It's going to, so if this is used to justify cutbacks, Medicare and Medicaid, that's going to filter down into the community level in terms of increasing all of our property taxes. I think here in Cattaraugus County, Medicaid, the Medicaid portion, I think, is 35% of your property taxes. If we have the proposed cutbacks in the budget plan to Medicaid, all of your taxes are going to go up to counterbalance those cutbacks. So some of those gains that you're going to make up in terms of the tax plan are going to be lost in these other ways. The larger issue is, it's said time and time again by Representative Reed that he feels the way to grow our economy, to create jobs, is to focus on taxes. I just don't believe that it's true. And it was mentioned here from other candidates. Well, it just doesn't create jobs. And there's they've put the CEOs right in roundtables recently, and when they ask the question, it comes back to no. I mean, you cut our taxes, we're not going to create jobs. It's going to trickle down into more pay for CEOs, buybacks, dividends. And it's absolutely true that if you're not closing off corporate loopholes, to the part of the discussion with the tax rates, it absolutely makes a difference when we're talking about marginal and effective tax rates. If we're cutting it from 35 to 21, and the effective tax rate was already 18, well, now that's going to go down to probably 5 because you didn't eliminate any loopholes. And that makes a big deal because it's being used to justify a much bigger issue. So I would love to take questions, talk about it. I appreciate you all being out here, and we'll talk more soon.
Chester, so don't think you can scare me with this snow. I'm used to going through this. I actually had fun, although I did get caught behind a double plow and going 30 miles an hour on 86 for about 5 miles almost killed me. My name is Tracy Matrano, and I am running for Congress because I believe that I can bring economic opportunity and jobs back to the 23rd District. There are generally 5 things that you need in order to have economic opportunity take off. You need healthy people, you need educated and trained people, natural resources, infrastructure, and capital. So let's take a look at the criteria and where we are today. We have people. We have people who are desperate for jobs. They definitely want that opportunity to come back to this community. Are they healthy? Not with the medical care that we have, and not with the medical care that our current representative keeps trying to persuade us is the right way to go, when we know we need universal health care. We need especially to address the addiction problem that has corrupted so many of our children, so many of our families. We need to go after the pharmaceutical companies to get the money back into a place like Cattaraugus so that we can correct that addiction problem. And we can get healthy people back to the next step, which would be education and training. We have a lot of work to do there. We have gutted our K through 12 schools, and we also need to be thinking about how to educate and train them for the 21st century. I just came from a house party today in Corning. There were many people from Corning there, and they said, but what are you going to do? How are we going to train people to know what they need to understand about fake news and how to walled gardens online, information literacy? Absolutely. As someone who's been working in information technology for 15 years, I've been advocating it long before I became a candidate for Congress. But we can't get that until we start to take our K through 12 education seriously again. Natural resources, we have aplenty. And I guarantee you that the rapacious industrial interests that feed into Mr. Reed's coffers know what a blessed community we have here with water, good soil, good climate, although, you know, a day like today. But you know what I mean. You know the opportunity that lies with all the natural resources. So let me move now to the area where there's absolute want. Infrastructure, the roads. We need to be able to get people to school, get people to jobs. We need to be able to have commodities move from out west in this area here to the eastern portions and up and down the sea. And we then need to get an internet that is going to connect every farm and every home and every school and every library. And then that's when all of this starts to make sense, because that's, if you build it, how they will come. So what's really lacking? Yes, I've mentioned many of those things, but what's really lacking is the leadership and the belief that this is a community that we want to grow, that we want to live in abundance, that we want to see thrive. We don't have it now because he's being paid not to lead. But I guarantee you, I will. Thank you.
Nearly 40 years ago, in the Finger Lakes, on my first day of classes, I met my wife. She's from Steuben County, and that's where we lived in the 1980s after we were married. In 1990, shortly after the birth of our daughter, we moved to Geneva. We live in the same house today. Standing up for working people is what I've done throughout my career. I'm an economist. I didn't study economics because I loved it. I studied it because I could see that economics was the thing that was so often holding back working people. So often the argument was, well, things will trickle down. No, they don't trickle down. And so I learned economics and mastered it so I could defend the people that raised me. So I'm an economist. I specialize in employment issues and economic policy. And that work has taken me into factories, often at 4 o'clock in the morning, working with companies and workers and with community leaders, trying to find practical ways to save jobs and create new ones. It's taken me across Western New York, working with the labor movement and the business community to create economic development partnerships in 7 counties, including this one. We did practical things, education, training, even securing hydropower for companies looking to expand jobs. Most recently, my work has taken me to the nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office in Washington, where I was in the room when the Republican-chosen CBO director told Congress and its staff that tax cuts don't pay for themselves. So they know better. And you know better. And it's just wrong. So, standing up for working people is also what will unite this district. We want the same things across the district. We want good jobs. We want health care. We want to retire with security and dignity. We want a promising future for our children, education, economic opportunity, a clean environment. We don't want the moon, but still Congress doesn't deliver. And that's because far too many members of Congress look out for other interests, and far too few of them stand up for folks like us. I will work for you. I will fight relentlessly for our common interests. And as you and I both know, advancing those interests is the only way forward. But I can't do it alone, so I need you to help. If you want to repeal and replace Tom Reed, you need to join me, you need to work with me. Right? Together, we can remind Congress that Congress is our house. And together, we can get it done. Thank you.
Thank you all for being here and listening to me. So, my name is Linda Andre. I'm a doctor, a retired doctor. I had a great career, 30 years as a cardiologist. I've worked in the Southern Tier. I came up to the Finger Lakes in 2002. Before that, I worked in rural areas in Wisconsin and eastern North Carolina. So I know the people in this area, having been intimately involved with them, and I've seen their pain and suffering. The reason I'm doing this is because there is a lot of pain and suffering in our culture, and it's time to end. Pain is an indication of something wrong, of dis-ease, of a problem with health. And that's what we're experiencing because we have developed a culture with our leader, so-called Mr. Donald Trump, of divide and conquer. There are groups of winners and losers, and he's asking us to place ourselves in one of those two groups. The only way we're going to do this is for us to come together. If you look at the Americans with Disabilities Act, these are a marginalized group of people who came together, who fought very, very hard, and their fight helped all of us here, disabled or not. So my idea is that when we have a rising tide, all boats are floating. My central issue is healthcare. I have a lot of experience in this area. I've seen people come to me and say, "Doctor, which pill should I take? I have 5 medications. Which one is the most important?" This is heartbreaking. This should not happen in America. The reason I became a doctor was because of the social contract in America. My father came from a farm in the Midwest. He left during the Depression. My mom worked as a bookkeeper to put her children through Catholic school. It's because of this social contract that I became a doctor. That is, education for me in the city of New York was free, if you want to call it free. It really wasn't. We all paid for it. But that was the contract we all made together to help me become who I am. So I want to now give back and serve my country to help understand what's happening here, what's our illness. Mr. Reed talks about extremist ideology every time anyone questions him. Well, I think the Republican Party has an extremist ideology, and I don't want to reach across and touch that toxic place, okay? I understand there's tons of toxicity up here in upstate New York with 4 different landfills. Right here in Carteragas County, you have a nuclear reprocessing plant that has been toxic for years and is still going on. In the Seneca Depot, there's a suggestion that we bring all the garbage up from New York City across our beautiful roads and incinerate it. This is a toxic environment from the top to the bottom. We need to get in the house. We need to clean it up for the health of our country. Thank you so much.